Hello, my name is Marie Doyle and I'm the Superintendent of Longmeadow Public Schools. Today I have two guests with me. I have the Assistant Superintendent for Learning, Michael Sullivan, and I have the Middle School Principal from Williams, Chris Collins.
Hello.
I'd like to welcome both of my guests today, and our topic is going to be professional learning communities, otherwise known as PLCs. I think many parents realize that we've been having release time where the staff has been working diligently on PLCs, and I think many of you have asked questions and would like to know more about professional learning communities, so that is why we're addressing it today. I'd like to open up by asking, what is a professional learning community? That seems to be something that our community asks often.
Sure. Well, I guess I'd start by saying it's just kind of a shorthand term to mean bringing teachers together to collaborate on student learning. It's essentially it's having teachers of the same subject at the same grade level meet frequently to take a look at results of student learning and to kind of compare notes about how students are doing with things that they have determined are essential learning outcomes. And there are a number of things that have to be in place in order for teachers to collaborate well. And we can probably talk about those over the next few minutes, but the first thing that I would say is we have to get to the point where there's a common curriculum, a shared curriculum that all the teachers agree needs to be covered and taught. Otherwise, when you get folks together to collaborate, they don't have much to collaborate about. So that's one kind of important ingredient to have in place for the work of professional learning communities.
Thank you.
And I guess I'd narrow it down more to just the middle level, because that's where I have, most of my experience here in Longmeadow is at the middle level and how these PLCs have come together. The thing that's a little unique at the middle level is we have time each day in our regular schedules that teachers can meet by grade level teams. So in a sense, their own sort of mini professional learning communities by grade level. And we have time set aside in the schedule, albeit different each day, where the whole grade can come together and talk about student learning, talk about curriculum, all kinds of various grade level issues, from who's teaching what this next week, how our regular ed interfaces with special ed. So while we have sort of the larger PLCs where Williams and Glenbrook may meet together by discipline, we also have smaller level of collaborative teams at each middle school, both Glenbrook and Williams.
That's great, because common curriculum is so essential, and parents will often say to us that a certain teacher does curriculum differently than another, and this really evens the playing field so that students all have the same education, regardless of what teacher they have. Mm-hmm. I do know that different work has been going on at each of the levels. For example, the high school has been focused on the NEASC report, mm-hmm. and this ties directly into professional learning communities as they need to develop more common assessments, and they've been doing that by departments. Mm-hmm. The elementary schools are at a different level. Michael, could you tell us a little bit about the work going on at the elementary level?
Well, we have to coordinate the work among 3 elementary schools, and this year what we're paying attention to is literacy in grades pre-K through 2, and math in grades 3 through 5. And again, we're focusing on having a common scope and sequence of things we want kids to know and be able to do, but then have a series of common assessments that will be administered during the course of the year, so that we're not just looking at MCAS test results as being the only way of gauging how well we're doing teaching and how well students are doing learning. So what we're doing, there's also people may be interested to know that there's a new set of learning standards or frameworks in Massachusetts starting this year for both math and for ELA, grades K through 12. So it's a good time to be doing the work of professional learning communities because we do have a whole new set of goalposts that we have to kind of match up with. And typically, it's not just in Massachusetts, but across the country, when you get a new set of standards that kids need to learn, they're very comprehensive. And so what we need to do is take a look at those standards and then be a little bit selective and determine which of those we're really going to zoom in on and focus on tightly to make sure all kids master those. And so the work that we're doing at the elementary level is to come up with some common assessments to see how we're doing against the new sets of standards. Again, in grades 3 through 5, we're concentrating on math, and K to 2, we're concentrating on ELA. And within the world of ELA, or English Language Arts, we're taking a look first at the elementary level at writing. And so we're taking a look, we're having people come up with common assessments related to different types of writing at the early grade levels.
Fabulous. I know that last year the 3 elementary schools spent quite a bit of time at looking at common curriculum, that each school had a little bit of a difference. But the Common Core standards came out, and for our audience, the Common Core are the national standards that are brand new. Massachusetts for many years has had our own set of frameworks. So the teachers at the elementary level actually took the Common Core and blended them with Massachusetts standards. And the third part of that is how Longmeadow standards fit into that. And they were able to come up with essential learning outcomes, and they agreed at all 3 schools what students should know and be able to do, which is really the foundation of a professional learning community. I guess my next question is, Chris, why do we need professional learning communities? Teachers have been teaching for a long time. Longmeadow's done an excellent job. We prepare our students for some of the finest colleges and universities in the country. So why do we need professional learning communities?
Well, I think for me, what kind of a PLC is defined by is collaborative work. And as much as we've all been kind of trained professionally as educators, I don't know that a lot of us have in our background real training on how to collaborate. You know, for years I think teaching was, while we worked as a whole staff in a building, it was a very individual profession. You could go in and close your door and teach, and we have some great teaching that goes on here. I think kind of looking at this from a PLC perspective, we're really talking about sharing ideas, sharing teaching techniques, best practice, that kind of stuff. And I think the only way we can get there is to start with a common curriculum, you know, develop some ELOs, as you mentioned, what is essential for kids to know by the time they exit a grade, for instance, and then to come up with some common ways to assess that. And that collaborative process from beginning to end, I think, is really what defines it and what makes it such an important part of education today. At the middle school level, to sort of tack on to what Michael was saying earlier, we're right at that process now where we've come up with ELOs and some common ways to assess them. And between now and our next early release day in December, all of our disciplines, math, social studies, science, and English language arts, are going to give their first common assessment across both buildings at the middle level. And then we're going to look at this student work, the results, together, collaboratively, at our December meeting. I think that's really exciting because that's kind of where this has all been headed. Now we can really start to sit down and say, well, wait a minute, my kids weren't as successful here as yours were. What did you do differently? And start to talk about practice.
We have a lot of educational lingos going. ELOs are educational learning outcomes. So we're talking about just the learning outcomes, what students should know and be able to do.
Sure. I guess I would add to that that a little bit of what's pressing about this is a lot is asked of public schools now more than they used to be. The demand, the mandate now is that every student is successful and that every student is successful at a high level. They need to communicate well, they need to collaborate themselves well, they need to be creative, they need to be discerning. It doesn't matter whether or not they're going off to college. To be successful in our kind of high-tech modern world, kids need to be able to do a lot, and we want all kids to be able to do that. And the research suggests that you can't get there by teachers being independent operators, that it's only through learning together that schools are successful in doing that. And the example I often use with people, what's hard about this, the cultural shift about professional learning communities is, Chris just mentioned this, but is asking people who have been solo practitioners to actually they lose a little bit of autonomy, not in their daily lesson plans, but in sometimes deciding what big topics they're going to emphasize or what materials they might use. It would be like if your sister-in-law came over at Thanksgiving and walked in the kitchen and said, I'm going to help you make the Thanksgiving dinner, and this is the way I'd like us to do it. Or if you were a great football coach and then all of a sudden someone told you had to co-coach with somebody else. It's not always easy to kind of make that transition or for people to understand why it's necessary. So there's a bit of some growing pains to it that we're in the middle of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like when parents ask what it is, I like to try and give an example. For example, if a teacher is responsible for teaching the multiplication of fractions, and everyone on the team agrees that's what students should know and be able to do. Often there's somebody whose students may end up, the class may get a result of 90% success, whereas someone else's students may only get a 67% proficiency. And in that case, the teachers sit down together and they explore, what did you do? What helped to get the students to this level? And they share best practices, as you had talked about, Chris. So this is very, very exciting. But I know one thing that teachers say to us is this takes a long time to do. So that just gets us to our next question, because parents are asking all the time, why do you need this release time? And this is a good question. It's an inconvenience for our families. I know the school committee's been supportive, but really wanting us to be accountable for this time and what we're doing. So could you explain a little bit on how we use these release days?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I guess I would say it starts by making, coming up with essential things you want kids to know and be able to do, and then figuring out how you will know that the kids have mastered those things. What are the assessments or measures of progress that you would want in place? And that's exactly what we're doing. We're starting by looking at the new state standards, and then we're taking those and coming up with a scope and sequence across the year. That's what elementary school teachers were doing yesterday when I was observing them, and that's what the middle schools have been doing for a couple of years now. And then taking a look at assessment results, and we've said, well, Chris and I both sat in on great meetings where we've seen that taking place. And so during these meetings, you might walk in and see a group of science teachers talking about a recent test that they just gave on rocks and minerals or something, and they would say, this particular lab worked really well, let's keep it. This video we used wasn't really worthwhile, let's not use that next year. And they're taking notes and writing that down on in their notes for next year on this program we have called Atlas. And so that's the actual work that's going on when people meet together. We could give you a bunch of other examples. Yesterday, I was observing the 4th grade math team, teachers from across the district. There were about 8 or 10, and they were talking about what they wanted to have, what questions they wanted to have on their common assessment that they're going to administer in a couple weeks. And they were really getting into the wording of specific questions and whether or not that question was going to test a process that kids needed to be invested to about how to solve a problem, or whether or not that wasn't very important and just getting to the answer was the thing that was critical. And it was a really rich discussion that got back to what was most important in 4th grade math and how they were going to know about it. So it's great. It was great to observe that kind of work.
I think I would kind of go at this from a different place, and that is, I think our goal K-12 kind of vertically is to make sure that kids get the same experience. And so all of the 6th graders that are coming to me or going to Glenbrook are coming to us with a similar skill set and with similar educational experiences, although they're coming from 3 different elementary schools. Mm-hmm. And our goal at the middle level, whether the kids are going to the 9th grade from Glenbrook or from Williams, is that they're arriving there with a very similar skill set, with similar learning experiences, a really similar set of skills and abilities. And this is only my 4th year here, so I'm still relatively young. I'm extremely young, but I'm relatively still new to Longmeadow, only my 4th year. And I would say when I first started working with Michael, almost 4 years ago, our curriculum, I think we were really doing a great job preparing kids for high school, but kids were getting to the high school with different skill sets. They were getting different experiences. And one of the things we really focused on over the last few years is bringing those experiences closer together. And there's just no way to do that during school hours. You know, we do have some team meeting time every day, and so does Glenbrook, but you're able to meet kind of with your grade level team. The only way that we can collaborate across buildings is to find some time that we can set aside and then meet during that time. And last year we started with late start days, and we did this chunk of time in the morning. Got a lot of feedback from the community, and then the recommendation was, what if we released kids early in the afternoon? It might be less of a burden on families. We built that in with existing staff meetings, so we could still put 2 hours of time together, but take away a lot less learning time. And even though now we've just done it once, today was my first day back in school, and I've already had some parent feedback that this process, the early release, was much less burdensome on their families than was the late start.
Excellent.
So hopefully that will continue, and we can continue to get better and better at this.
And people might want to know that this isn't just some experimental thing for Long Meadow. It's a very common practice nationally. And I was at a meeting with the curriculum coordinators in the area this morning, and I know Wilbraham and Hamden has a series of early release days or late start. I'm not sure which way they're going this year, and I know Ludlow does the same, and there are other schools in the area that do as well. So it's a pretty common practice among both some of the schools that are performing at a pretty high level and those that aren't quite there yet. So it's pretty common practice.
I know that last year we used release time to bring the elementary teachers together, where, Chris, you talked about vertical articulation, but it needed to start with that horizontal articulation, where all the fourth grade teachers from every school needed to get together and agree on what students needed to know and learn. And that took almost the whole year to do. And once they did that, then they did the vertical articulation, where it was hung up on newsprint. People went around to look, went back to grade levels to look at. So I think it's a lot of work, and those release times we were taking teachers for 3 to 4 hour meetings just to come up with the learning outcomes. So when we're talking about now bringing teams together to build on assessment, it really is a great investment in helping our students, but it consumes a lot of time. So we do appreciate the support of the community. How long do you think it will take until until the teachers feel that they have enough time and enough background and they're able to do this without the release time? What does this look like over a long period of time?
Well, I don't think. I think it's an ongoing thing. I don't know. It will not conclude because what we're talking about is looking at student results and meeting frequently to talk about practice. Frankly, I don't think that it's not something that we could check off of a list and say will be accomplished. The front loading of coming up with common curriculum and making sure we're following standards is more time intensive, but looking at practice on an ongoing basis and looking at student learning and then starting to differentiate instruction and think about how we're supporting struggling students. I think it's a process of being just a good learning organization that will be hopefully is ongoing as long as we can get it, sustain it.
And sometimes we talk about assessment, and I think most of us that are older, Chris, have gone to school in an environment where it was summative assessment. We were taught something, and at the end we were given one test, and that was it. So now we're talking about formative assessment, testing before a unit's taught, ongoing assessment during it, and then resulting in summative assessment. Has that changed the way that we're teaching? Will it change the way that we're teaching?
I mean, that's certainly a great question right now. It's so current because we're doing a lot of assessing in our schools right now. Really K through 8 or 1 through 8, we've just completed a lot of new assessments, the grade and the GMAID, and there's been a real learning curve there as well. Because again, sort of the traditional training that a lot of us went through back when we were trained as teachers was much more from a summative perspective. You know, you teach a unit, you test. Okay, X amount of my students got it. There's so much more push, and again, it's from data that's been collected. There's so much more push to assess in the moment and really understand what kids know and are able to do right now, so I know what my next lesson looks like. And again, there's a huge learning curve there with our teachers.
So different than the way we used to teach.
It's so different than the way we used to teach, and it takes time. That's the other thing. I mean, there's always a real pressure to cover the amount of curriculum we need to cover that's laid out in our standards, before our state test in March, April, and May.
So I might say that that's really the essence of professional learning communities, that we're looking more at formative assessment to really guide the way that we teach. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely, half the coin is collecting assessment data to kind of inform instruction as you go, and to inform teachers about how things are going so that they can make adjustments. Just like, when you're coaching a sport, the thing that's helpful is during practice, coach tells you try shooting your foul shots this way or that way. In basketball, that's where good learning happens. It's not so much looking at tape after the game's over and analyzing it that way. That's like the MCAS, being kind of the autopsy of the year. We want assessments in the moment so you can make adjustments right then, and kind of drive instruction on an ongoing basis.
It's interesting. I was at Gillette Stadium for a conference, and I went to the wrong floor. And the floor I went to is where the Patriots actually do their classes and their training. And I was very surprised to see Tom Brady, who was going in to study tapes, because a lot of what he did was formative in figuring out what he needed to know to prepare for the game. So I think that type of assessment's going on in more areas, and we can learn from that.
Did you ever make it back down to the right floor?
Not for a while. There's also a committee in town that we have at the school district called Differentiated Instruction Committee, because I think that there are children who we have yet to challenge. And we're talking about a day and age where STEM education is so important, and technology is going to play a huge part in how we teach students. So how would you say that the professional learning communities and this new type of assessment will help students who need to be challenged?
I think it'll be, for starters, it'll be clearer, especially if we get to the stage of kind of having pre-assessments of kids that already know the stuff that the teacher intends to teach in the next couple of weeks. And if that's the case, then it's kind of the teacher's obliged to think about, well, what can I do to enrich that kid's learning experience and not really have them be idle. So we'll have information that lets us know that. That's pretty clear. That's the easier part. And then the other thing is that we'll have a little bit more clarity about what's important to teach. We won't be rushing to teach everything, and we'll try and take our time to do things well. And with that in mind, I think the pressure will be off the teachers a little bit to feel like they need to rush. And so when they are helping average or struggling students, they can make time to kind of having a more enriched and advanced experience for kids that need to be accelerated. And then the harder question becomes, how do you structure your class in a way that you can teach kids that are at different levels of performance? And that's always been about the biggest challenge I've had in my teaching career, even before MCAS existed. What can you do to manage your classes in a way that will allow you to challenge everybody? And technology is really going to, I think, play an exciting role in us being able to do that. But it also has to do with classroom management and having the right kind of resources in the room, too.
I agree with all that. I think that Michael kind of hit it on the head. And I think that's, to finish answering the question you asked before, that's why I think needing collaborative time, not only in our own buildings, but across buildings, is going to be a long-standing need. Because I think, we're working right now toward common assessments, and we will continue to kind of tweak those as we go. But I think there's always that next thing waiting. And, I would love to jump in right now and spend time consistently on differentiating instruction, both for kids that aren't making the grade and for kids that are our high flyers. And how, when we have them all in a heterogeneous classroom, how do we meet all those needs? Sitting down as a professional learning community and talking about, how do I differentiate in this math class? How do I differentiate in this science class? With all these great minds in a room, there's so much great instructional practice to share, but we need the time to actually sit down and share it. And so I really believe that even though we are asking the community to support us in release time, we need to be held accountable for what we do, and we need to really use that time effectively to increase the product that we're putting out there for kids. And I think we're doing that.
That's great. Richard Dufour is really the expert in education that talks about professional learning communities, and we've talked today about what are students learning and how do you know. But the other two key questions, he has four: what happens when students are not mastering the material, and what happens when students already know. So those are the four questions that are framing everything that we're doing. And as we spend more time, I hope that we'll have more time to look at that question: what do you do when students already know? Because I know that's on the minds of many people. The other question that parents have, we've just introduced grade and GMAD, GMAID and grade. Okay, so
Don't ask me what those stand for, but I know that's what they're called.
they're assessments in literacy and assessments in math. Could you tell us a little bit why we're doing that and how they're going to benefit teachers and students?
Well, they're both nationally normed tests. A grade is for EL for English, and GMAID is for math. We introduced the grade assessments last year at the middle school level because we wanted to have a better understanding of reading comprehension levels kids had when they came into the classrooms. It was information teachers really were asking for and thought it would be useful in figuring out how to best instruct individual kids. But now it's expanded, so we would like to have snapshots 3 times a year of at the beginning of the year, mid-year, and towards the end of where students are in their skill set in English and in math. And so these tests will be ways to get that kind of snapshot information that's not too narrow in its focus. It's not just driven by one teacher's practice or even by the state standards, but by a set of questions that have been around a while and will be a good measure of how we're doing.
Great.
And I think, it seems in sort of every aspect of business and now education, so much is focused back on data. Decisions are made based on data. And I think this is another important piece of data that we're collecting. The only kind of consistent piece of data we've had over the last number of years is MCAS. And like Michael mentioned earlier, we take those tests in April and May, and we get the results the next fall. So they're not really informing us. Mm-hmm. They're kind of giving us a report on how kids did. The big current focus in MCAS is growth. What kind of growth did my child have from last year to this year, measured in a very complicated way. But I think what's important about GMAID and the grade is that it's another piece of data. As a standalone assessment, it's not necessarily better than any other standalone assessment, but I think it's another piece. So we use some MCAS data, we use the GMAID and the grade data, we use our common assessment data. Maybe there's a pre-test and post-test that our textbook has. We put all of these into a bigger pot, and we have a much better sense of the learning that each child is doing. So I think it's a piece of the puzzle. It's not a standalone answer.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I really appreciate both of you coming to join the Superintendent's Roundtable to talk about this very important subject. I think the community, as well as the teachers and I, will be watching closely to see how much we help students, but we do appreciate this time because I think that we're doing a fine job of seeing what students know and how do we assess that. So we look forward to even more information, and perhaps we can touch base at a later date. I hope you'll join us over the next several weeks. We're going to interview Larry Birdie, who's going to talk about the NEASC report that will give us critical data on our high school, and we'll also be talking to the Lyrics group and having them sing for us. They have just won a national award as chosen as the best choral group in the United States, so that should be an interesting program as well. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in the future.
We can end by having Chris and I sing. Maybe that, and we could see who stands up better.
I think it's a good time to end right now. Thank you anyway.